Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Hello, gamer! Greetings, fellow GM and/or player. Welcome to episode 114 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker, and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith somewhere outside time and space. I'm doing another world building feedback episode today. So we're going to be hearing from listeners like you today talking about world building. And I want to thank everyone for all the feedback. I really appreciate it. So this is going to be our 16th world building episode. And I'm pretty sure when I started doing world building episodes way back in season 2, I think it was, I had no idea I was going to be doing 16 of them. This is super cool. And I have to say, I really appreciate everyone who gives me feedback on the world building stuff because you guys really kind of keep me fired up about it. And, I talked about in one of the really early world building episodes about how I started kind of working on this. It's been a couple years now ago, and worked on it for a little bit and then kind of lost steam with it and kind of put it on the back burner for a while. And I think part of the reason that I lost interest was that I just wasn't liking a lot of the ideas I had. And when I came back to it a few months later and I started creating Primordia, kind of my world 2.0, I was a lot more excited about it, I think, because I had better ideas. So I think that was part of it. But I think sometimes you just get burnt out. Any kind of creative endeavor, whatever it is, there are times where you just get burnt out and it's like nothing is coming. You're trying so hard to get new ideas or to work on ideas you already have, and the inspiration just isn't there, and you feel like it's this uphill battle. And if you're like a professional writer or something, then you have to learn how to push through that and keep going. But luckily for those of us that are just doing this as a hobby, we have the option of just walking away from it for a while. And so that's what I did. And that definitely helped. But the other thing that really helps is being able to talk with other people about it and hearing what other people think and what other people have to say. So I guess kind of the moral of this story for you, listener, is if you're working on building your own world, find someone that you can talk to about it. Now, you can write in to me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com, and you can tell me about your world. You can go to the Google Plus community for Game Master's Journey, and you can tell the other listeners about your world. And that's awesome. And I definitely encourage you to do that, but also, try to find someone in your day-to-day life that you can talk to about it. An obvious choice would be your players. And I know, I deal with this too as GMs. We like to keep our secrets, right? And that's part of good storytelling. To be a good storyteller, you've got to have lots of secrets so that you can have those really cool reveals where you kind of pull the curtain back and the players see something that they haven't seen before, and they understand things that have been happening in a new light. And those are really powerful moments. And those are the moments that your players will tend to remember long after the fact. So, I totally get it. And there's definitely something to be said for not, telling your players everything and keeping secrets. But as a creator of a world, you need someone that you can talk to about the world who's going to get excited about it with you, just to kind of refill those creative batteries. And players are an obvious outlet for that. So maybe there are certain things about your world that you don't want to talk about because you don't want to give away too much to the players, but maybe there's something else that you can talk about. Think about things that would be common knowledge in your world. things that the player characters would know. As game masters, we don't want to sit there and info dump on our players, right? You don't want your first game session to be 2 hours of the GM reading an essay about her world, right? Like, players don't want that. So oftentimes the players don't know nearly as much about your world as what their characters would know. So think about things that the player characters would know, just everyday knowledge of your world that people would have that the players don't know about. And that can be a great place to start to talk about your world with your players, and even better, get some ideas and feedback from your players. That can be a lot of help. And I've gotten a lot of great ideas for Primordia from listeners on the show, or listeners of the show, I should say. I've gotten a lot of great ideas, and some of them are just straight up, someone gives me an idea and I'm like, I'm totally stealing that. I'm totally taking that. Like, I think maybe it was G-Ferg who had the idea of the Church of the Nine and having some kind of unified religious organization that recognizes all the gods. And I thought that was a great idea, and I totally stole it. And then there are other times that a listener will have an idea and I like it in like concept, but I change it or something. Or sometimes it just gives me another idea that's not really the same, but something that the listener said like sparks an idea off in my head, right? Talk to people about your world, talk to your players. And if you can't talk to your players, or your players aren't interested, find someone else to talk to. Obviously, anyone else who plays D&D or whatever game you're playing would be an obvious person to talk to. But other possibilities could be just anyone who's into the genre that you're doing. So if you're running a fantasy game, anyone who reads fantasy and is really into fantasy might be interested in hearing about your world. And, that's the cool thing about world building is you can talk about your world as a setting, as a place, and never get into any kind of game mechanics. So you can talk about that with someone who, say, likes fantasy, but doesn't play RPGs. And you can have a conversation with this person, and it doesn't matter that they've never played D&D. It doesn't matter that they don't know what a D20 is, because when it comes to the world building and the setting stuff, none of that really matters anyway. You can just talk about your cultures and your religions and your countries and the various political groups in your world and things like that. And you can get really good feedback from someone who doesn't play games, because those of us that play the game, we're kind of stuck in this mindset of it's a game, right? So if you're talking to someone who isn't in that mindset and is just thinking about this like, oh, this is a setting for a fantasy novel or something, they might have ideas or thoughts that someone who's more steeped in that RPG mindset might overlook. So before I get more into world building stuff, and before I get into the world building feedback specifically, I do have a piece of feedback that I got that I'll talk about here at the top of the show that's not necessarily world building related, but is RPG related. And this feedback comes from Psionic Myconid, who wrote in and says, "Hey Lex, I just wanted to share some thoughts about a thing that has been bugging me for my 20 years of playing tabletop RPGs. I don't know if this is a problem in other games, but it's something I've seen from every DM I've played with." He says, "If I play a bard, why do DMs expect me to actually sing something at the table or bring an instrument? If I play a wizard, why do I always have to come up with, quote, magic words? I'm playing a game to unwind and relax and have fun. I don't think wanting to play a support role means I have to overcome performance anxiety several times a session. Besides that, the other players don't want to hear that stuff. We're playing a game. I've never been able to play a bard in my life because I ask before I roll up my PC what will be expected, and I'm always disappointed. I love the idea of playing a kind of intellectual lore master and storyteller, but I can't because the DM wants me to play the lute and sing songs. My longest running character was a wizard in 3.5, and we had so many disagreements about, quote, magic words, I ended up taking the silent spellcasting feat and prepared everything 2 levels higher to avoid having to recite a sonnet every time I want to use a fireball. For me, it sucked all the fun out of it. Most actual play I've seen online does not do this. I don't know how or why I've run into all these DMs who must have been spoiled by theater major players, but I can't be the only one frustrated by this. The Player's Handbook and the DMG make it seem like the vocal part of a spell's requirements are only there to prevent players from using wizards like thieves, shooting off nukes safely from the shadows and everything is dead before they know it. Maybe I'm reading into it too much. All right, I had to take a sip of my coffee before I get into this one. Cyanic Myconid and anyone else who is encountering this phenomenon, this problem, you are not reading into it too much. You are being subjected to poor game mastering. First of all, the bard issue. I don't understand how someone who's read the Player's Handbook and or the Dungeon Master's Guide could come away with the impression that if someone plays a bard, they have to actually physically, in real life, sing or play an instrument to do their thing. Nowhere does it say that in there. And in fact, I'm pretty sure it pretty explicitly says the opposite. That's why we have things like deception checks and persuasion checks, because you should not have to rely on your personal ability as a player to reflect what your character can do in the world. Does that mean that only someone who's a bodybuilder can play someone with an 18 strength? Of course not. Like, that seems ridiculous, right? Because I was going to say we're all wimpy nerds. Probably not all of us are anymore. But I think that stereotype still holds true for a lot of us. I know it does for me. I'm a wimpy nerd. I'll go on record. You know, so it's obvious to us in our culture that, well, obviously I could play a big burly barbarian if I wanted because it's a game. And just because I'm a scrappy little guy in real life doesn't mean I can't play Mr. Universe in my fantasy game, right? Because it's a fantasy game, right? Nobody has a problem with that. But for some reason, some people have a problem when you take it from the physical arena and you put it into the mental or the social or the performance arena. So they might not have a problem with saying, well, just because I don't have an 18 strength in real life doesn't mean I can't play a character with 18 strength. But then some people will have a problem with a statement like, well, just because I don't have an 18 charisma in real life doesn't mean I can't play a character who's really good at deception or really good at persuasion or really good at performance, or really good at all of those things. That's why we have dice mechanics. So that, you know, maybe I stutter and I stumble on my words and I have a very hard time talking to people in real life, but I want to play a charismatic person because this is a fantasy game again. I want to play someone who's what I wish I could be, right? Just like the guy who wishes he could lift 500 pounds over his head can play the big burly barbarian. Well, maybe I wish I was really good with people. And maybe I wish I was really good at talking to people. So I want to play a high charisma character, but I don't have a high charisma. I don't know how to talk to people. Well, that's why we have mechanics. That's why we have dice rolls to resolve those things. The same thing with someone wanting to play a bard. You know, if I want to play a bard, I have to be a musician in real life, or I have to be a performer of some kind. That's nonsense. That's ridiculous. And I would say if you are a game master and you require that of your players, if you want to play a bard, you have to actually perform for us at the table. Stop it. Knock it off. I mean, first of all, you're probably losing players because there are people that just won't deal with that and will just leave your game. The players that you do have aren't having as much fun as they could, and I'll bet you don't see a lot of bards in your game either, do you? And a bard is an awesome class, especially in 5th edition. The bard is an awesome class. I think any group that you show me of PCs that doesn't already have a bard would benefit by having a bard. They make any party better. They're an awesome class. And to basically make the bard off limits to any player who either can't or doesn't want to perform for the group, play for your supper, monkey. To just cut off the bard from all those people is crazy. Why would you do that? Unless you just don't really like bards and you don't want players playing bards in your game. Now, I've never personally encountered this. I've never had a DM who was like this. I've never been like this myself. Now, something that I would do as a DM is if I had a player who was playing a bard and who was musically inclined or was good at theater or something like that, and they wanted to role play that as part of their character, like that would be awesome. And I would encourage that. And I think it would be really fun for everybody at the table. But again, that's because it's coming from the player, right? The player wants to do this and they're like, hey, I have a lute at home. Can I bring my lute and say my bard plays the lute and I actually play my lute? And I'd be like, sure. As long as it doesn't become disruptive, absolutely. And I might even occasionally give inspiration or bonus XP or some kind of, little perk for you doing that. Just like I might give someone a bonus if they drew a really cool sketch of their character. But I'm not going to require it. And I'm not going to penalize the players that can't draw because they didn't draw a sketch of their character or their sketch of their character was a stick figure. I mean, that wouldn't be fair. To some degree, I think all of us play these games, if not to escape reality, to at least enjoy a different reality for a while. And to limit your players' characters on what they can do as real people, you're kind of castrating that. You know what I mean? Don't do it. And as far as the wizard thing, that one's new to me. Like anytime a spellcaster has a verbal component, you're making the player come up with what that is. I would say that's the DM's job, honestly. You're the world builder. You're the master of the universe. If anybody should be telling the table exactly what the wizard says when he casts Fireball, it should be the DM. If someone has to do it, it should be the DM, not the player. Now, obviously, if a player wants to come up with their verbal components, that's awesome. I would fully encourage that. But if we're going to say that it's someone's job and someone has to do this for the game to go forward, that would be the DM's job, not the player's job. You're the DM. You're the one coming up with what magic is and how it works in your world. You're the one that would have to come up with those verbal components, not the poor player playing a wizard. So yeah, so Psionic Myconid, my answer to your question or your it's not really a question, but my answer to this is not good. And at least in my experience, it's not normal. It's very unfortunate that in 20 years of playing, you've encountered so many DMs that are like this. Maybe you've only played with a few DMs over that time, maybe, or maybe it's a regional thing where you are or something. I don't know. But as far as what to do about it, I mean, the easiest thing would just be to find a different DM. But if that's not possible, maybe try to educate your DM. Maybe point out the sections in the book where it explains social checks and mental checks and things like that. And be like, we have these mechanics in the game. There's a performance skill so that I can make a roll and I don't have to sing for my supper in the real world, because that's why this is a game. This isn't a simulation where we pretend to be our characters and we can only do what we can actually do. It's a game. And maybe, I don't know, point them to some actual plays on YouTube where people don't do this. I don't know. But yeah, that's pretty crazy. That's pretty out there. And I feel really bad for Psionic Myconid that you've had to deal with this and that you've basically had entire classes kind of shut off to you because you have a GM that doesn't know what they're doing. And I don't know. I mean, it's one thing to be ignorant as a GM. I mean, we're all ignorant of things. Nobody knows everything. It's one thing to be inexperienced. It's one thing to do something wrong or not do something the best way. I mean, anybody can do that, right? There's nothing wrong with making a mistake. But when your player comes to you and says, hey, I think it's really lame, if I play a bard, I have to sing and dance. I don't sing and dance, but I want to play a bard. Or I think it's really stupid that I have to come up with verbal components for all my spells. When a player comes to you with a complaint like that, and they're like, I'm not going to play a bard because of the way you do it. You should do something about that as a DM. Or at least consider the possibility that you're wrong, or maybe you're not doing things the best way you could. Maybe get over the ego a little bit and maybe go read the book of the RPG you're running, see what it has to say. Go talk to some other GMs, see what they have to say. So yeah, I'm curious, listener, have you experienced this? What Psionic Myconid is talking about? Have you had GMs that made bards sing and dance? Have you had GMs that made wizards and other spellcasters actually come up with verbal components every time they cast a spell? If nothing else, it seems like a great way to bog down the pacing of your game. Yeah, so I'm curious how many other people have encountered this. I suspect a lot of people have, because like I said, when I first heard about it, I thought it was a joke. And I've since learned that no, this does happen. So I would not be surprised if it happens a lot more than I think it does. So how many other people are dealing with this? And, what would be great to hear is if you did have a GM who did this in the past and you got them out of it, maybe how you approach the GM. Like, how can Psionic Myconid approach these GMs to educate them without just, getting their fur up and they're not going to listen. Of course, everybody's different, right? But if you've been through this and you found a way to handle it so that the GM kind of came around and saw the light, I'd love to hear what you said or what you did. And I'll pass it on to the other listeners.
This is Matthew Colville, and you're listening to Game Master's Journey.
All right, well, this is the part of the show where I give a quick thank you and a shout out to the people who support the show and help make this show happen every week. So I want to give a big thank you to Chris, patron Chris, who just recently upgraded to Tier 5. So way to level up, buddy. Thanks for becoming a Tier 5 patron. And I also want to thank my Tier 6 patron, Mr. Steve Strickland. So let's hear it for Chris and Steve. Yeah. You the man, Chris. So thank you guys, and thank you to all of the patrons of Star Walker Studios. I really appreciate it. And you can learn about becoming a patron of the show yourself. Just head to the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com. At the bottom of the show notes, I've got lots of great ways that you can support the show, among them becoming a patron. And a lot of them don't even cost you any money. Another great way that you can support the show is check out battlebards.com. BattleBards provides you with premium audio for your tabletop RPG, whether you need sound effects or music or anything like that for your ear holes. Check out battlebards.com. They've got lots of great content for you. And if you decide to buy one of their packages, grab one of my coupon codes over at Star Walker Studios, and it'll get you some free bonus tracks with your first order at battlebards.com. All right, so Josh Hancock wrote in on Google Plus talking about the whole topic of where does the guild's money come from and things like that. And I had a few people give ideas for that, so I just put them together here. So Josh says, as for how or where the guild gets their money, I have an idea. You could use the dues of 5 gold pieces per month from the guild artisan background, which was kind of what I put forward as, well, this would be this is my first idea of how to handle that. It'd definitely be one of the easier ways. But only for those members who don't go out and get loot, like the researchers and guards and things like that. And those who get loot must give a certain percentage in lieu of dues if it's from a guild chartered expedition. And yeah, that's a great way to go about it. I'm really not sure what I'm going to do with this yet. I've had some ideas, and I'll discuss some of them as we go forward. But one thought I did have, if I go the route of just having dues, like the guild artisan background where you pay so many gold pieces a month as your dues to the guild, one idea I had is I would make that a function of your character level, right? So maybe it's 5 gold per level. So at first level, you're paying 5 gold a month. At second level, you're paying 10 gold a month, and so on. Because obviously, something that would be an appropriate membership due for a first level character is not even pocket change for a 20th level character. And also, the higher level you are, the more the guild is doing for you. So it makes sense that your dues would increase as your level increases. Or I could even base it on the tiers, because we have tiers of play now in 5th edition. So if I wanted to have that amount change less often, I could do it based on your tier instead of your level. I love doing these feedback episodes, and I love getting feedback from you. And there are a lot of great ways that you can get a hold of me. Let me know what you think about the world building. Let me know what you think about the show. You can email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can head to my website, starwalkerstudios.com. You can find all kinds of ways to get a hold of me there. You can find the show notes. You can find all my podcasts. You can also follow me on Twitter at LexStarWalker. You can find me on Google Plus LexStarWalker. I'm also on YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest, Reddit, and you can find links to all that good stuff at StarWalkerStudios.com. Boz Bunnick also commented on Google Plus about this topic, and he says, "Thanks for another episode." You're welcome. He says, "I think the guild fees being connected to character level makes sense, and it's easy to do. You could also encourage a part of the treasure in addition to that, with the caveat that those who give a lot receive more back. Or maybe it helps to gain power or influence in the guild. I think it could easily be far more than 5 gold pieces." Yeah, and I totally agree. And I already kind of had something like this in the first Primordia adventure I ran. And I think I'm going to talk about this more later. But one of the ideas I had is the guild is very interested in anything historical and anything magical that's something that they haven't encountered before. So you might, in a dungeon or something, find historical documents, or maybe a tapestry that depicts a battle or something like that, or works of art, right? So those kinds of things that have historical and or cultural significance, the guild's really interested in stuff like that. And also you might find a magic item or an artifact that no one in the guild has seen anything like that. And so they would want to study that and try to figure out how it works. So I did have this idea of giving something like that over to the guild, like they see that very favorably. So if you're someone that's constantly bringing back these historical treasures, then yeah, you're going to work through the guild ranks more quickly than someone who doesn't. Boz goes on to say, "In my newly started campaign, one character pays 90 gold pieces for a season of being part of a caravan drivers guild. So something like adventuring should easily bring in 50 to 100 gold pieces per level per month." Yeah, totally could be. On the other hand, maybe players would just see it as a money sink. You could propose that they either pay a bit more or give more items or fulfill more of the important missions for the guild, those involving powerful items they hand to the guild, toward their obligation, making it not paying 1,000 gold, but having something like a budget to fill. Yeah, and that's definitely another way that you could handle it too. So, there's some discussion about this on the Google Plus group. So I went ahead and posted on Google Plus some of what I've come up with as far as the ins and outs of the guild, as far as what I call dues and perks, which is basically what do you owe to the guild and what does the guild give to you? And this is this is all work in progress right now. But this is kind of what I'm thinking right now. So the idea I had as far as dues, I mean, I could definitely do the flat fee per month, or I could do like these guys are suggesting where you have a flat fee per month that you pay if you basically didn't do anything. So like if the player characters take 3 months of downtime, then they would have to pay that fee. But if you're finding things for the guild or going on missions that the guild sends you on, then it's like you're kind of working for the guild and you don't have to pay that. So I could do something like that. But one idea I had as far as, because I like this idea of the guild getting part of the loot. Like you go in a dungeon or whatever and you find stuff and the guild gets some of that. And that's your dues. It's not so much, you write them a check every month. It's like, they get a share of the booty kind of thing. So with that in mind, I thought the easiest way to do that, instead of like doing percentages, like they get 10% of the value of what you find or whatever, because that would involve more math and might get kind of complicated. So I thought an easy way to do it is just the guild gets an equal share. Now, this isn't so much magic items, but your monetary treasure, which would be art objects, actual coins, trade bars, gems, things like that, your monetary treasure, the guild gets an equal share. So if you have a party of 4 PCs, then when you divvy up the loot, as far as the monetary stuff, you would consider it like you have 5 PCs, and that extra share of loot goes to the guild. So that's the first idea as far as my guild dues. Also, members agree to sell all items of historic or magic significance to the guild. The guild pays full price for these items. So the idea here is, one class of treasure that you find is art objects, right? And sometimes you find an art object that's really cool and it's something a player character wants to wear, like maybe it's a cool necklace or something, or maybe it's something they want to put in their stronghold. So maybe they find a really cool tapestry or a really cool statue or something, and they're like, I want to put that in my castle. So that does happen sometimes, and that's always fun when that happens. And when I come up with art objects, a lot of times I try to come up with at least a couple things that I think someone might actually like to keep. But a lot of the times those art objects just get sold for cash, right? And like gems, when you sell an art object, you get its full value. You don't get half. Like if you're selling a suit of armor or something, you only get half. Art objects and gems, they're worth what they're worth, so you get the full value. So the idea is that the guild wants those, and also gems they want too, because gems oftentimes are components for spells and making magic items and stuff. So the guild would much rather that when you find art objects and gems, that you sell it to them instead of someone else. So they pay full price, and my original idea was that they were actually going to pay more than full price. I was thinking either maybe 10% or even 50% more than the actual price. And I may still do that. I'm just a little concerned that might be too much bookkeeping for the GM. It's like, every time they sell to the gold or to the guild, I got to times it by 10% or whatever. So that's probably something I'll play test and I'll try doing that and see how much of a headache it is, if it is. And kind of see, is it worth the pain in the ass to do that just to get the player characters a little more money, or is there another way I could do that? But it just makes sense to me that the guild would try to incentivize characters to sell those kinds of things to them instead of some other merchant or something, because they would want that stuff. Also magic items, same thing. Of course, magic items you can't really sell to anybody but the guild, because most people A, couldn't afford to buy a magic item, and B, wouldn't have any use for or desire for a magic item. So it's going to be really hard to sell a magic item to anyone but the guild in Primordia. See the Dungeon Master's Guide for more info on that. Now, the other idea here is that the guild also studies magic items. So if you find like a really powerful magic item, like a Staff of the Magi, right? Well, that's something the guild would want to study. Right. So normally they would just ask that you hand those over. Okay. And if I'm a fighter and I find a Staff of the Magi, I'm probably more than happy to give it to the guild and have them give me a fair price in gold for it, right? But if I'm a wizard and I find a Staff of the Magi, I'm probably not going to be so happy just handing that over to the guild. I'd kind of like to keep it. So what happens in that situation, if a character has something that the guild wants, but the character wants to keep it, and I'm thinking mainly magic items here, then what happens is really what the guild wants that staff for. They don't want to just have a Staff of the Magi on hand for whatever reason to have it on display. They want to study it, right? So what they do in that case is they say, okay, you can keep the Staff of the Magi, but we want to study it. And they work very hard to find times, they don't want to like be studying your Staff of the Magi while you're out in the dungeon and you get killed because you don't have your Staff of the Magi. So they study it when you're, not adventuring. And, they work that out with you like, okay, well, sometime in the next so many months, we need to have access to this item for X amount of days so that we can study it. And you work that out with the guild, and then you get to keep the item. But of course, then they're not going to pay you for it, right? So also player characters can sell magic items that they find to the guild. And, this is just the standard half market price for them. So, just like you'd sell anything, you get half what it's worth. And, this will be interesting because, by the book in 5th edition, you can't really buy and sell magic items. And what little kind of system there is for it, it makes it very difficult to do. And we're not even given prices for magic items. Like in 3rd edition, every item had a price. In 5th edition, we're just given very broad guidelines for magic item prices. So something that probably I will do, when I write a book of Primordia, is I'll have price lists for magic items so that, every GM doesn't have to figure it out for themselves. But at the same time, those prices are going to vary even more than normal goods would, right? Prices aren't static, they vary with supply and demand and all that. What's going to be even more volatile with magic items because they're more rare and there's fewer people that want them and things like that. But in general, you can sell a magic item to the guild for half its value. And player characters can also buy magic items from the guild. And, one of the main things that you can buy from the guild are consumables like potions and scrolls. And there are certain things that just are pretty much always going to be available. Like your various healing potions are pretty much always going to be available. A lot of your kind of lower level common spell scrolls like Detect Magic will be available, or tongues or things like that. And what I did for the Primordia adventure that I did before was I made a list that I gave the player characters of basically this is what the guild has in stock as far as magic items. And I chose a handful of items that they had. I gave prices for them. And then the idea is, that will change over time. So, the next time you go to the magic item shop at the guild, they might have completely different items for sale. So it's definitely not a thing of, the players look in the DMG and be like, I want one of these and one of those. And, it's a limited supply. They only have certain things. What they have is handpicked by the DM. And that's it. And, it's, I think, a great money sink for the game. And there are people that say there aren't enough money sinks in 5th edition, which I disagree. But this is a great money sink, letting player characters buy magic items. And, I get why some GMs are resistant to, quote, magic item shops. Like, I get it. But I think a lot of times you're kind of worrying about nothing. To me, an equal problem to the idea of having a magic item shop and I can just go buy magic items is, when you have a party of player characters who have all these magic items they don't want, and so they're just going to sell them to random people, or, it's in a world where people adventure. And those people who adventure find magic items, and they find magic items that they don't want or can't use, people would sell said magic items. Also, in a world where people adventure and people use magic items to adventure, there would be a market of people wanting to buy magic items. So it kind of flies in the face of reason to think that, oh, it just doesn't happen. Right now, I kind of like the way the DMG handles it, where it's like every transaction is like its own thing, and you have to find a buyer or you have to find a seller, and they might be shady or whatever. And it can kind of become just buying a magic item could be a whole session, with all the things that could come up with that. But there's also times where the PCs just need some better potions of healing, and just let them buy it. Like, who cares? Right. So I thought for my campaign, for my world that I'm building, that I would rather have a world where you have somewhere to unload that +1 sword that no one wants to use, and you can actually get some money for it or trade it for an item that you can use. Because the last thing I want when my players are high level, or when their characters are, is for them to have this list of treasure that's all these magic items that no one uses, no one is ever going to use. And I had a campaign in 3rd edition we went into epic levels, and that's how it was. People had sheets of magic items that no one ever used and no one was ever going to use, just because, it was random treasure that they got and just no one wanted it. And it's like they're dragging this stuff around in bags of holding, and it's just, to me, that's ridiculous. I'm like, that would never happen, right? There would be someone that would give money for that, if only to have it in a collection somewhere, or more likely so that they could go adventure. So the guild in Primordia is a great way to kind of deal with all this, because it's like, they're an organization of adventurers. So of course they'd be interested in magic items. They have all these adventurers who work for them. They occasionally find magic items that they don't need or they don't want, so they sell them to the guild. And then they have other adventurers working for them that maybe need or want that very item and turn around and buy it from the guild. And, the guild makes a little money on those transactions, right? So that's another way that the guild kind of gets some cash flow. All right, so PCs can buy magic items. So that's another of the perks of being in the guild. Also, when a character is officially inducted as a full ranking member of the guild, they receive a guild cloak, which is basically a cloak of protection. And I have thoughts of maybe actually making these relics and making them items that will scale as the PC levels. And the main reason I'm thinking that is because I like the idea of the guild cloak. And I guess I don't know if I've explained this on the podcast before. I know I explained it in the actual plays that I did. But the basic idea I have is that adventuring groups or parties or teams, whatever you want to call them, are known entities in the world, kind of like a rock band, right? Like, who Ozzy Osbourne is, right? But you also know who Black Sabbath is, right? So Ozzy Osbourne might be a 10th level barbarian, and Black Sabbath is his adventuring party. It's the same kind of thing. And just like in our world, you have sports ball teams, right? Well, those teams have uniforms. They have colors, and you can recognize those, right? So I have the same kind of thing with my guild, in that adventuring parties tend to come up with a name for their party, their band name, and they're known by that. And the ones that are especially successful and especially charismatic or good with, just the common people, have a level of fame and notoriety in Primordia, just like a rock band does in our culture, or just like a sports team would. People know that group by name. They know maybe even the individual members of the group by name, and they know the group's colors. So that was the other part of this is adventuring parties tend to have a name, and they tend to have colors. And what the guild does is, when you are inducted into the guild, and you're usually inducted into the guild as a team. So you don't tend to come to the Guild of Adventurers as a single person and be like, I want to join the guild. Here's what I have to offer. That's usually not how it goes. How it goes is you form a team of adventurers, and then you come together as a team to the guild. And the guild is usually like, well, what have you accomplished? And then you have to give your accomplishments as a team of adventurers to be considered into the guild. So when you're made a full member of the guild, you're already part of an adventuring team. Likely your team already has a name. And if not already, when you become a member of the guild, your team chooses colors. And then what the guild does is it provides each of you with one of these cloaks, and the cloaks are in the team colors. So now you can walk around Alondria in your guild cloaks, which are showing your team colors, and people associate that with your team. So let's say we have a party of adventurers, and they are the head bashers. I don't know. I'm just pulling crap out of my ass here. So we have the head bashers, and their colors are purple, black, and gray. Okay. So they have guild cloaks that are purple, black, and gray. And I do the thing of like, what is it? Like primary color, secondary color, accent color, or whatever. I don't remember exactly what the terms are. So it's not just the colors themselves, but what's the main color, what's the secondary color, what's the accent color, which will affect, if your main color is purple, then your cloak is going to be purple, right? If your main color is black, then your cloak is going to be black. So even two teams with the same three colors would have them in different order, so their cloaks would look different. And the idea is people will recognize you by your cloak. Not only do they recognize that you're part of the guild, but they can recognize what team you're part of if your team has notoriety. So when a group of player characters become guild members, they get one of these cloaks, which mechanically are cloaks of protection, but may increase in power over time. And I was getting around to telling you why I was thinking of making them relics, which is my magic items that increase with power over time that kind of scale with character level. And the reason is because you're going to be known by your cloak, and your team's going to be known by your cloak. So I kind of would like them to be an item that they would keep through their career. And cloaks of protection are really nice. And, if that's all it was, people would probably keep them for their entire career. But the thing is cloaks of protection require attunement, and you can only have 3 attuned items. So, once you're 17th level, you might have something better than a cloak of protection that you want for one of your attuned items. So I was thinking of, giving the cloaks upgrades at various points so that I can keep them relevant through all the tiers of play. But we'll see. I'm still kind of weighing that in my mind, whether I'm going to do that or not. So usually a PC will become a full member of the guild, at which point you're an apprentice, basically, at second level or higher. It's kind of second level minimum. And the idea here is that, they don't just let anybody in the guild, and you have to prove yourself first. And you have to prove yourself as a team. It's not just each individual proving that they're worthy to be an adventurer and a member of the guild. It's proving that your team is worthy, that your team can function as a team, and that the guild can send you out on missions and contracts and you will be successful. So for instance, and this has come up, if you as players create a team that doesn't have any healing ability, then you have to prove to the guild that on your own, without the guild helping you, you can be successful as a team without healing ability. Because otherwise you're just, you're either a liability or an asset, right? The guild wants assets. It doesn't want liabilities. So it's kind of a way to bring some of the metagame into the game. The metagame aspect of making an adventuring party that can function and that has its bases covered. In a lot of worlds and a lot of games, that's metagame. And it's kind of like, we're metagaming if we think about, do we have a healer? Do we have a rogue? Do we have a quote tank or whatever, right? But in Primordia, it's not. It's not metagame at all, because you are forming a team. It's a thing you're consciously doing. You're not just people that happen to be in the same bar together when shit went down. That's not how it works in Primordia. You are a team that has come together, just like a group of musicians form a band, right? And you're not going to form a band and realize that everybody's a singer and no one can play drums, right? You're not going to form a band with 5 drummers and that's it, right? It's like, well, if we're making a rock band, we probably need a drummer, we probably need a bass player, we probably need a guitar player, and we probably need a singer, minimum. Or at least we need those roles filled, right? So maybe the guitar player could be a keyboard player or an accordion player instead. But that role of we need someone to play melody and lead needs to be filled, Maybe the drummer, instead of playing a drum set, is playing, bongos or something, right? But he's still filling the percussion role, right? So the same thing with an adventuring party. You need someone that can fight. You need someone that can heal. You need someone that knows their way around magic. And you probably need someone who's sneaky. Although in Primordia, kind of everybody needs to be sneaky. And that's a whole nother topic, but that's another idea I'm kicking around with Primordia is finding ways to incentivize players to stick to lighter armor and be more sneaky. So the idea is in Primordia, wearing heavy armor and having disadvantage on stealth is a huge liability, not only to you, but to your party, because there are going to be many times where you need to sneak by shit. And if you have a party with a bunch of clankers in it and people have disadvantage on stealth and it's enough to offset the entire party, because I do like group checks, which I think is a thing in 5th edition. I know I've seen various designers of D&D do this. So I think it's actually a thing in the rules, but where like say stealth, you have everybody in the party make a stealth check. And as long as half or more of the characters, or as long as more than half of the characters make it, the party as a whole succeeds. So even if you've got a dwarf in plate armor who's got disadvantages on stealth, as long as the other 3 characters make their checks, they're somehow able to mitigate the dwarf's noisiness. And that's something you should role play, like ask the players, how are they keeping the dwarf from giving everybody away? Because that can be fun to figure out. But that way, you don't have the one unstealthy character ruining it for everybody every time. But it does increase the odds that the party as a whole is not going to succeed, right? So anyway, tangent over. So in Primordia, it's not metagame at all to actually build a good adventuring party, because that's what your characters would be doing, is you're trying to put a band together, right? So you got to make sure all the roles are covered and that you're a good team and you work well together and you're going to be effective together. And you have to prove this to the guild by going on some adventures on your own without the guild to help you and being successful. So that's why I say, minimum of 2nd level to be inducted into the guild as an apprentice. And, chances are good you'll be even higher than 2nd level, because basically you need to, as a party, go have an adventure on your own first. So chances are good if you have an actual adventure, you're going to be higher than 2nd level. Now, one way that you can do it in Primordia is you can just start the player characters at 2nd level, start them as members of the guild if you want, and then do either just hand wave 1st level and as part of session 0 have the players come up with, well, what was the first adventure you guys did together? Because there was one before you were inducted into the guild, and let's kind of together come up with the story of that adventure. Or you could do like a short little prelude with them that isn't like a whole session necessarily, kind of highlighting that adventure. So that's what you could do if you just want to start them in the guild. And, I know a lot of us in 5th edition, we like to skip 1st level for various reasons. So that's a way that you could do it. You could just start at 2nd level. They're already in the guild and hit the ground running. So yeah, at 2nd level, you're an apprentice. You get a guild cloak, which signifies that you are a member of the guild. And then the next rank in the guild is journeyman, which you have to be a minimum of 5th level to be a journeyman. And somebody asked on the Google Plus group, well, how does the guild know what level you are? Well, first of all, this just because I'm saying you need to be a minimum of 5th level doesn't mean that in the world the guild is thinking in those terms. I'm telling the dungeon master, your player characters need to be at least 5th level before they qualify to be a journeyman. In world, it would just be you need a certain level of power, right? And there are in-game reflections of that. For instance, any spellcaster, any full spellcaster gets access to 3rd level spells at 5th level. So the guild could easily say, well, you can't become a journeyman if you're a spellcaster until you can cast 3rd level spells, right? If you're a wizard and you can't cast fireball, you're not a journeyman yet. You're not a journeyman until you can cast fireball or a spell of equal power to that. And, I'm sure if we looked in the other classes, we could find other things that a character can do at 5th level that they can't do before that you could see in the world and say, oh yeah, that guy's a badass because he's doing this. And also keep in mind that all of the classes are represented in the guild. So if your character is a barbarian, then the 15th level barbarian who's in the guild can probably look at your character and say about, how good at being a barbarian he is, right? Or spar with your character and be like, okay, this is, he's good enough to be a journeyman, but he's not any better than that kind of thing. And these are pretty wide, it's not like every level is a different rank, right? They pretty much correlate with the tiers of play. So they're pretty wide ranges. Okay. So, to be an apprentice, you got to be 2nd level. To be a journeyman, you got to be 5th level. And then master is 11th level and grandmaster is 17th level. So those are pretty big gaps. So yeah, it might be hard to tell the difference between a 5th and a 6th level character, but you can tell the difference between a 5th and a 2nd level character. And you can tell the difference between a 5th and an 11th level character, or an 11th and a 17th, right? Those are pretty wide swings in power there. So yeah, at 5th level, you're eligible to become a journeyman. And again, these are things that are earned. So it's not like you become 5th level and you're just automatically a journeyman. You have to earn it. When you become a journeyman of the guild, you are given a guild weapon. And this will either be a magic weapon or a class item, whatever is appropriate. So if you're a wizard, it might be a wand or a rod or a staff or something like that, as opposed to a weapon, right? Because wizards don't necessarily use weapons. And then at 11th level, you're eligible to become a master. And at that level, the guild gifts you with a suit of magic armor, or if you're not an armor wearing type, some kind of defensive item. And then at 17th level, you can become a grandmaster of the guild, and the guild will award you some kind of legendary item. And the idea with these items, the guild cloak is kind of what it is at 2nd level, but the weapon at 5th level, the armor at 11th level, and then some kind of legendary item at 17th level. And I'm thinking like a wondrous item for that. What those are opportunities for the dungeon master to give your character a specific item that is perfect for your character and have it make sense in the story, right? If you're playing a paladin and you find a holy avenger under a rock somewhere, or in some goblin's lair, or even in a dragon's treasure hoard, it can seem a little contrived, especially when like everybody in the party finds an item that's perfect for them in the same treasure hoard. It's kind of like, okay, the DM just put all this stuff here because he wants us to have it. That's cool. But it can seem a little contrived. It can kind of break your suspension of disbelief a little bit. And I've always looked for ways, because I love creating magic items for my players. That's one of my true joys as a DM. That's one of the things I love about Dungeons and Dragons, is I love taking a character, and I usually wait till they're like 10th level or so I really have a good feel of who this character is, and coming up with an item that really would be awesome for that character. It's like, if I was playing this character, what would I want, kind of thing. And sometimes I can find something in the book, like someone playing a paladin, a holy avenger is an obvious possibility. But a lot of times I create something from scratch, or I'll combine a couple items together or something like that. And I love doing that. I love coming up with those items. So this is a way for you as a DM to be able to do that at kind of milestones in the character's career and have it make total sense. Because, well, the guild, they have access to tons of items, so they can probably find the thing that they're looking for. And they know your character. They've watched your character develop through their entire career. So they know what would be a good item for your character to have. If you have a weakness, like maybe your armor class is terrible, they know that. They can help you shore up a weakness or something like that. And so I really like that. So these items like the weapon, the armor, and the legendary item, they could be items that are actually crafted for the character by someone in the guild, or it could be an item that the guild has in one of their vaults that they just decide they should give to this character. It could be a sword that was wielded by a guild adventurer long ago, that kind of thing. And some of these items could even be relics, and perhaps they were crafted by a god for that character specifically and given to them through the guild, or maybe it's just a relic that the guild has in their possession. Now, I will say, and again, relics in my world are magic items that scale in power with character level, and they tend to be created by gods or at the behest of gods. So if we're talking about a relic that is associated with a specific god, then obviously the guild would only give that to someone that's in favor of that god, right? Because the guild doesn't want to piss off one of the gods for sure. And the idea is that these items given to the player characters through the guild are or should be kind of their most powerful signature items. And that way the items that really define a character or that really enhance the character's concept are items that I created or I hand selected. They're not items I just rolled randomly on a table, which I really like. And also, I've probably at that point, gotten some input from the player, whether directly or indirectly or knowingly or unknowingly on the player's part, of what they're looking for. And, this is kind of a trick as a DM. If you don't already know, listen to your players when they're talking to each other. Always pay attention to what your players are saying, because they'll tell you a lot. And, I don't think as a DM, you should ever do the wish list thing like they did in 4th edition. I think that's a terrible idea. What a great way to break suspension of disbelief. I don't think you should ever do that. I don't think you should be like, what kind of item does your character want? And then, lo and behold, 3 sessions later, you just happen to find that item. That's going to kick them out of the story better than anything I can think of. So you don't want to do that. But what you can do is listen as they're talking amongst themselves. And, you might hear a player say something like, oh man, I'd give anything if I found a wand of wonder. Or you might hear a player complaining about their crappy armor class. Or a player saying, wow, I really wish I had a magic weapon so that I could get past these creatures that, can only be hit by magic weapons or whatever, right? So if you pay attention, even without asking your players, which I don't think you should ask your players, if you pay attention, after, 10 levels of play, you probably have a pretty good idea of what the player characters need and what the players want. And if you're really lucky, they're the same thing, and then it makes it easy. So I shared all this on Google+, and Boz went on to say that he thinks that the share idea makes sense of giving the guild a share of the treasure. The only drawback to that he points out is, how do you handle the PCs who want to hide what they find from the guild? Then again, doesn't that just give you as a DM another plot point to explore later on? After all, with all their powerful magic, can the PCs rely on no one from the guild finding out that they're cheating them? The simpler solution is the fee, just making them pay so much a month, but it might feel too much like bookkeeping to check that every month. And I think you might just end up hand waving it to avoid that. And I think you're totally right there, Boz. I completely agree. Just the having, how many months has it been? How many times do we have to pay our guild fee? I don't know if everybody has this experience, but I've noticed in my games, and it doesn't even matter what game it is, we very rarely pay much attention to the passage of time. If you're running a campaign right now, can you just tell me off the top of your head how many days or weeks or months or years your campaign has been going in game time? Maybe if you're really anal or really attentive to detail, you might have a record of that somewhere that you could go look up. But most of you couldn't just tell me, oh yeah, it's been 3 months, 2 weeks, and 7 days or whatever, right? Like we tend to like not really pay attention to that. So to have something that says, oh, every month the player characters have to pay this much money is kind of a pain in the butt, and will, as Boz says, tend to be overlooked. And eventually as a GM, you'll probably just be like, forget it. Or you'll just every once in a while be like, give me 100 gold and we'll say we're even. Part of my thinking here is that the PCs will be selling the majority of their loot to the guild anyway. I mean, why go all these different places trying to sell your loot when you can go to the guild and they're going to give you a really good price for all your gems, all your art objects, and your magic items? Like, I think very quickly player characters are just going to be like, we sell everything to the guild because it's super easy. And like I said, I've been kicking around the idea of giving a 10 to 50% bonus for art objects and things of historic significance that are found in the world, and any unique magic items that the player characters find and sell to the guild. And if I do the 10 to 50% bonus for that stuff, I might, in the case of like, say, the character that finds a Staff of Power, and actually Staff of Power wouldn't work because it need to be a unique item. I'm sure the guild already has seen a Staff of Power before. But just using that as an example, player character finds a Staff of Power and wants to keep it, but lets the guild study it. Well, obviously the guild's not going to pay him for the item, but they might pay him the extra 10 or 50% that they would have paid for it for letting them study it. So I might do something like that. So, just keeping that in mind, and also the fact that the guild is going to be pretty much the only place to sell magic items. And it might even be a thing of it's frowned upon or even illegal to buy or sell magic items elsewhere because they're dangerous and you don't want just anybody trading in them, right? So I could see it, at least in a laundry, being against the law to buy or sell magic items from anyone but the guild. But even if you can do that, it's going to be more headache for the players, right? Because they got to find a buyer and all that stuff, or they could just go to the guild. So anything that the player characters wanted to keep on the sly, like, oh, we don't want the guild to know about this treasure because then we have to pay them our share. Well, they're going to have to find someone else to sell it to. They may not get as good of a price. And at the very least, it's going to take time and effort to do that. And time is money, friend. But of course, that's all kind of metagame stuff. So I do think, if I go this route, that there would be some way in world that the guild would have to avoid being cheated by adventurers, right? Otherwise, they'd be cheated all the time. So one idea I just kind of threw out there as a joke, but the more I think about it, the more I kind of like it, is maybe the guild hands out bags of holding. So maybe in addition to your guild cloak, when you become a member, you also get a bag of holding. And maybe what people don't know is the bag of holding actually keeps track of everything that's put into it and taken out of it. And the guild can take the bag of holding and access that. And then they know. If you put it in the bag of holding, they know, what you put in there and what you took out. And they'd be like, boy, you've been putting in a lot of treasure that you're not claiming on your monthly balance sheet to the guild. What's up with that? So jokingly call that the bag of holding and accounting. So I don't know. Maybe that would work. I don't know. So G. Ferg also wrote in on this, and he was saying, I was also thinking about how the guild could have an income, and I had an idea, maybe something like Templars. Maybe the guild uses something like that as in bankers, basically. Not in the sense that they lend money or invest or anything like that, but in the sense that since they are effectively global, it could be a means of moving wealth around the various cities and could also be a secure location for storing wealth. I think this is a great idea. Perhaps the nobility and merchants dole out some to the guild to move around various cities for them via promissory notes and things like that. So he's talking about the merchants and nobles basically giving some of their money to the guild to move around for them. Then the guild takes a small fee or percentage or whatever, and then there is some funding that you don't have to really worry about and can just hand wave away. Because really with economics and stuff, you don't want to be too bogged down with all the ins and outs. You just need a plausible, logical explanation that makes some sense, and that's enough. And I completely agree. I completely agree on every point that G. Ferg just made. I don't want to get bogged down in economics. My players don't want me to get bogged down in economics, I'm sure. But I do need kind of a conceptual framework that makes sense. So when a player casually asks, well, where's the guild get all their money? I have an answer that makes sense. And we don't need to get into the actual math and the figures and, how much money are they making by moving money from place to place for the nobles and the merchants? Like, we don't need to get into that level of detail. We just know that it's enough. All right. Well, I think it's about time to wrap up episode 114, starting to go hoarse. So that's always a signal to me that I've been doing this long enough for now. I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Stanko, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey.